Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jonno White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jonno White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to do just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Kathleen Naglee. Kathleen is the head of school at the International School of Helsinki. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jonno, for having me.
Yes, I've been looking forward to chatting with you, Kathleen. Firstly, can you tell us a little bit about the school and about your role as head of school?
It's an interesting role. So I'm an international school leader, and So that means I am running a school, but not just the educational piece, but I'm running as a CEO of the company as well. So I have two roles, really, two large roles, and that's dealing with the finances and business end of running an international school that is mainly targeted for global expats and diplomats. And then I have my educational leadership, trying to lead a school towards what I believe is a future focused vision of education. So my days are often quite strange, actually, as to um, the type of work that I would be dealing with.
Yeah, I have found it fascinating working with school leaders, not coming from education as a sector. Every time I work with school leaders, I do find the structure, the just how time poor your often your leaders are, because so as an example, just trying to find time for different meetings, because other jobs, even though there's always a lot on people's plates, it's rare that you have people who literally, if you're wanting to get everyone together, so many people are committed to, you've got all these young stakeholders who have to be, supervised. So I find schools really
Yes.
fascinating, and the leadership dynamics in schools, the principles, I believe, cross over with every other sector, but the unique way that plays out in a school environment sort of caught me by surprise when I first started working with educators.
I often have very funny days, I think. Sometimes I'll have this very serious meeting with the architects as we're working on our new annex project, and then I'll have a knock at the door, and there'll be a 4-year-old standing there with one shoe who barely speaks English. They'll say, "Shoe," like they lost their shoe. And like, oh, okay. And I'm running out in the hallway and doing push-ups, looking underneath the lockers to find this child's shoe so she can go home. So it's this is a bizarre mix of very serious, difficult meetings oftentimes, because I'm the person that
Yes.
you often come to with the biggest troubles. But at the same time, I have this beautiful access to working with young people who could care less what my title
That's
is.
right. Yeah, that's
And
beautifully
and
put.
sometimes I think I'm just a person who opens the door in the morning, who stands there. I'm the door greeter. They think that's my job.
That's right. Sometimes that's all they see, because yeah, you're spending your time in a lot of those meetings with people where it's actually escalated to need Kathleen involved. Absolutely. So I'm really excited to hear some of your story. Let's start by I want you to think back to your childhood and growing up. What were some of the moments from that season of your life that really shaped you into the person and a leader you are today?
Well, I would say when I tell my story, I think people are surprised about kind of my journey into leadership, that I would not have been the person that you would have thought would have entered. I grew up in a home in which we were working class, and sometimes maybe working class poor. My mother never graduated high school. She was a refugee, born in a refugee camp from World War II. My father was a Vietnam War veteran who came back with a lot of issues from his experiences during the war. And it was not, it was no one's aspirations I would even make it to college. And so just from the start, my my schooling and my time as a young person, I think people would have not even remembered me. I was the person that you forgot their name, I would say. And somewhere along the line, I came into my own. And I often talk about my first moment of leadership really was when I was working as a summer job on a painting crew, an outdoor homes painting crew, and I was made the foreman of that crew. And I sometimes point that as my first moment of leadership, as I was the only one who would climb the tallest ladder. And the tallest ladder in US measurements is about 40 feet. So they call it the 40-foot ladder. which is about 3 stories high. And I, it's an interesting kind of dynamic that I think as a metaphor, oftentimes for my leadership, that it was this my ability to take risks and overcome fears that led me up to work on that ladder. And I often say, once I was at the top, you can see far into the distance. And I think my strength as a leader is this combination of risk and the ability to vision or envision what's coming next and where we need to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that picture of where you started, remembering back to the willingness, being willing to confront your fears and to climb the ladder was a starting point for you in leadership, because there is so much of that in leadership. I find that there is a pattern where great leaders who are doing amazing things often point to at least one, but there's usually multiple times where they go, you know what, I probably no one really wanted that opportunity, or no one really would have chosen to take that role, but it was on the table, or I put my hat in the ring for it, even though it wasn't a guarantee. Or as someone shared on the podcast, I can't remember who it was, but they said their first real leadership role, their boss had sort of asked multiple other people who had said no, and so they were the last pick,
Yes.
and that was really where they got their start. They're doing amazing things now, and it's that willingness, isn't it? That willingness to face your fears and step out is a massive part of every leader's journey.
I do some training for women in leadership in my field, and this is often the point we talk about. Um, Many women who are teachers, who should be entering in leadership, who have all the competencies and skills, often do not. And there's this, there's this fear piece, combined with how others will see them, as if taking that moment of leadership or taking charge lessens them amongst their peers. And I often talk about this willingness. To me, this willingness has to be committed or combined with your values. And if your values are incredibly strong about um, the type of changes you want to see in your organization, this is the piece I try to kind of re-emphasize with them, that many of the women I speak to have a very strong vision of what might need to change in education. I was like, that's the why. That's the why you're moving forward. And to do that, you have to move yourself out of this comfort zone of a small team, or just your own class even, and take that forward. And so to me, this idea that you have this willingness combined with values is how I think great changes and important changes can happen in any organization.
Yeah, I really like how you've put that willingness, but also values. That's so good in your journey. So that's I really appreciate the insight into, as you said, people may not have even remembered you from school, and tell us a little bit about your journey from there to now. I know that's there's a lot to that, and we
Yeah.
can jump back in and ask you about some more specifics. But yeah, what was your journey from that point to end up doing what you're doing now?
And you spoke about falling into leadership or falling into jobs, and this is for me as well. I went to college to study geography and urban studies. Not a typical field for those who would maybe enter into educational leadership one day, for sure. And right out of college, I got married, and my husband got this offer for the other side of the country. I grew up in Philadelphia area, and we moved to New Mexico, which was mainly working with indigenous local populations, Navajo, Native Americans, Pueblo people. And when I was there was no job opportunities for my field. I ended up substitute teaching, and then eventually was hired as a social studies teacher. And along the way, I became a history teacher and picked up some other gigs. But the big kind of opportunity that came to us was that we met some friends who had been in Europe in this post-Soviet era in the mid 1990s, and a lot of Americans and expats from around the world were going to these regions. They were in their early 20s and were there to teach English and kind of be part of the rebuilding of Central and Eastern Europe. So we ended up in Hungary. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor from Hungary and had not returned since she had fled in the middle of the night in the 40s when the Soviets had taken over. So she had survived the concentration camp, went back to Budapest to find her home destroyed, and the Soviets had marched in. And so at one point she decided to leave. And so me going to Europe was this return of our family to the region as well. And I was hoping to find some family members, which didn't happen, when I was there in the mid 90s. But so I started having very interesting experiences as an educator. For a short while, I went back to the U.S. again, and I taught in Southern California in a dangerous school that I used to say felt like guns, drugs, and helicopters. And I really kind of honed my craft in a community like that. And I
Wow.
loved those students, and we created this very safe place. I understood how it was to create safety with a team, with others, and later ended up teaching history in Estonia. And again, kind of still in this kind of post-Soviet space. Eventually, I became an upper school principal and then the director of that school. And a few years later, I don't know, 5, 6 years later, I ended up in Helsinki and I was recruited north. There's just a short ferry ride between the two countries, between Estonia and Finland.
Yeah, incredible. I love that your story, like you said, started with not even in education, and you've ended up really finding your passion. Who were some of the mentors along the way? Some of the leaders who, as you reflect, either from afar or from working closely with them, influenced you the most and taught you the most about leadership?
Unfortunately, a lot of my leadership, first entrance into leadership, uh, I had really no one. So the first school I ran in Estonia, the director of the school had stepped down, and I had put my foot forward. The school was in financial trouble, and I thought I could fix the problem about and change the model financially. And even though this was not my background, and so I put forward to the board, hire me for a year as an interim, and let me see if I can turn the ship around. And so I found myself never having the role. I had no educational training in leadership at that moment. I had no financial training, but I'm a committed learner, and I hit the books on a lot of topics, and I ended up taking over, the kind of or changing the direction of the school, and the school went, towards the right path, and we ended up becoming one of the most innovative schools in Europe during the early 2010, 2015 era, and
Wow.
I was able to, yeah, figure it out. And I didn't really have anyone. And one of the reasons I end up doing women in leadership trainings and retreats now is because I found myself so lonely during that time that there wasn't somebody I could turn to. So
Yes.
I've created networks now so that women like myself, especially women, find themselves in very strange situations in school leadership, because they're often the one that is tapped when the school is in jeopardy. So there's this,
Mm.
we talk about this glass ceiling idea, but it's really a glass cliff where women are often finding themselves in their first leadership in a very dangerous kind of position where they have very little experience, and financial or other reasons, the school or the community is being rocked by some reason. So I was on my own. Over time since then, one of my heroes in leadership is a woman named Ellen Stern, who was one of the first international school leaders, female leaders. She retired in her early 80s. She's still alive now and sometimes does consultations, but she was this firecracker of a woman when I met her when she was about, I don't know, 79 or 80. And she was just a beautiful, realistic leader who, you know, could laugh at the troubles that we sometimes face, and the absurdity of our job at times, and just kind of looking for pathways for how you meet your vision, how you keep that vision of a school, and not losing sight.
Yeah, that's incredible, and I can only imagine finding, being in that position where you really felt so, um, I guess, on your own, starting out as a leader. It's interesting though. One thing that entrepreneurs talk a lot about is um, that if you want to start something and you don't know what to start, but you know that you think you have an entrepreneurial sort of passion, it's to actually look at yourself or look back at yourself 10 years ago and think what helped me, or what's the thing that got me from where I was to where I am, and or what's the biggest pain point that I have had. And I can hear that in your story. It's very entrepreneurial that you went, this is very lonely, and there has to be places for women in leadership in schools to go, so they're not alone and they don't feel lonely. And so if they are, at this glass, like you said, the cliff, right, rather than the ceiling, that they can have
Yes.
support so that they can navigate it and not fall and then potentially be scarred and not want to try again.
Yeah, not continue. And what's interesting is that the COVID era has changed that completely, because we all went online, in the educational, stratosphere, and we found each other. So 10 years ago, there weren't those sort of internet networks. There wasn't, educational Twitter is highly active. So now, if I needed someone or some idea, I could put something out, and I would be, have a response probably in a couple hours of like 10 great names of people to contact who'd be willing to, answer a question or talk to me. And which is just amazing now. And now, my leadership journey has taken me to a global stage on social media in many ways, because I can share these learnings quite easily, and I can be guests on podcasts and webinars, and talk about strategies, and people can find me, and an incredible difference. So in this COVID era, how that changed, I think, in terms of networking
Mm.
at least.
Yeah, I agree. I get so I'm just so excited for the future of leadership, not just in schools, but I think for me, I love that you do retreats for women in leadership, and recently I've been thinking a lot about my own leadership journey, and sure enough, the biggest real aha moment I had and revelation for me as a leader, which is really where I started Clarity, my leadership consulting came. It really was solidified at this one week long retreat that I was a part of, and I think uh, that's always been the case for a long time. But the opportunities now, which COVID has really sped up because everyone had to change, faster than ever before, and so it brought a lot of things forward.
Yes.
There's so many opportunities because I think that's one of the biggest things about leadership is that it's it can be very lonely, and even in different sectors, it can feel very lonely. And if you feel like you have a community and you have people that you can who are a sounding board, particularly outside of your organization, that's just such a powerful support for a leader. And so yeah, I'm so excited to hear that's been your experience through COVID.
And for me, it feels, and I think for many people, and probably for yourself, it feels therapeutic to help others in their journey, because we get to a point where we are able to see patterns more clearly. The older I get, I'm hoping I'm getting a little bit wiser, and I can see how things play out and understand the politics of situations a little bit more closely, and can kind of, sometimes show that the dangers ahead and the opportunities too that someone might be able to consider. And it just feels that um, in being part of that community feels that it's a healing journey, I think, as well.
Absolutely. I'm interested to ask Kathleen, as you reflect on starting out as a leader, when you were very much having to figure things out on your own in that first opportunity that you talked about, are there any stories from that year?
Yeah.
Like, that must have been such a swimming in the deep end experience for you. Are there any stories that come to mind of big against the odds wins, or mega, like the, yeah, as Tim Ferriss says, your favorite failures? I love that as well, because we all have things where we go, wow, I learned so much by doing that, and oh my goodness, I'll never do that again. Any stories that come to mind?
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think you have to go through the failures to understand what happens next. Um, Oftentimes in leading and managing of teams, you'll get pressure when there's a member of your team who is maybe not high performing. And I think the pressure when I was first a leader, that you'd have these people say, you need to fire this person, you get rid of this person. And there's a lot of pressure that suddenly you have all the power, and you're going to you make these decisions very quickly. And I made some decisions about moving some teachers. Well, actually, I did not fire, but one teacher actually left. And I understand now how I was played into that role, like that. It wasn't to my benefit as a leader to take on the kind of maybe I wouldn't say revenge, but the attitudes of some that you needed to make a quick decision on someone. So I made some decisions, and some people were very, very unhappy. And the way that split morale of the school later on, and how they saw me then as being maybe um, impulsive, that I would make these decisions, that I had not kind of shown the rationale well enough. So like I got burned in a number of times, but those experiences, I think, have to happen. Now, I would be more likely to try to figure out. I would be more likely to approach a teacher who's underperforming in a coaching strategy than I would be in a performance dismissal strategy. And
Yes.
I've realized over the years that sometimes people are really shining at some point in their career, but for whatever reason, they might not be shining in their current role. And maybe it's a mismatch. Maybe they feel that something has happened in the past where they don't feel valued anymore, or they don't feel the work is meaningful. So I want to do my best to deep dive into that first and get to know that person, understand where they are. And in schools, we have members of staff that might be in a school for 30 years. And when I talk to people now about how you lead others and leading adults, and all of us in our 30 or 40-year career are going to have ups and downs, and sometimes those ups and downs are terrible. Every year I have teachers come to me with cancer diagnoses. Every year I have those whose parents are dying in another country, and or their child is having severe issues, is on suicide watch. and all sorts of, stories where I am the holder of secrets as well. And so, I need to make sure I'm creating an empathetic organization, that when your life has that turn, and all of us will have this, all of us will face suffering, maybe multiple times over a lifetime. Um, are we there for that person? Are we building in the structures that when you need someone's help, there really is true help and compassion for you at that moment? Or if you are having mental health struggles, that we're helping you work through things, or sometimes just figuring out where's a better place for that person in the organization. And of course, that doesn't work for everyone. It's not 100%, and there's some people who will never be a good fit at your school, and that's having also conversations about how they might need to move on because maybe their values don't meet your values as to what your organization is about, and that's fine. But that can be done in a way that feels also helpful to that person. And there are times where I'm helping someone get another job at another school, and I can be someone who is helping them navigate that as well. So I believe looking at your team, looking at your community through the light of this deep humane lens, will serve you more than any checklist of observations or performance reports. Knowing the people
Mm.
that you're with, knowing their lives, and being that coach, being that person who has seen a lot, and helping them through that stage of their life, really, oftentimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, and I think the only thing I would add, or the thing that comes to mind as you share that, is that for leaders who are really wanting, sometimes you can feel like being compassionate and having empathy is, you know, I guess it's fighting against the bottom line or fighting against the organization's values. But I think a lot of the time there is a way that can be learned, which is often a trail of mistakes along the way, is how you actually learn these things. But there's a way to lead with compassion and empathy, and I love Kim Scott's book Radical Candor, because it's that idea of both being high on caring and high on challenging, like a great parent, someone who
Yes.
that they've got your back completely, and they'll tell you straight when something needs to change or if there's feedback, and it's both of those things together. That's what a great leader does. And just pushing more into that corner of the quadrant where you really go high care
Mm.
and high challenge, it gets rid
Yes.
of so many of the issues. Like, it's not comfortable, and it's a rocky road, and there's still challenges on the way, but it gets rid of a lot of the fermenting toxic stuff that builds up because previous leaders, sometimes if you're coming in to transform something, haven't had the
Yes.
courage to go there in the small moments, so you end up in a big moment. But I think it is possible to do both. But for me anyway, my journey, it certainly wasn't intuitive for me. I certainly had to learn how to balance that, because when I first tried, I made some big mistakes, and I think that is necessary for every leader to have a go.
Absolutely. And I think this idea of community, the culture of a community, and how it is on the shoulders of the leader to change culture, I believe. And I think some of that comes from the ability to be vulnerable in front of others, to tell that authentic story of yourself. But yeah, the setting the the bar high is essential. And the work I've done in Helsinki, yeah, we've increased our enrollment and became, kind of globally recognized in the last 4 years of my leadership. And that's because when I came into that school, I always have aspirations that this is going to be, um, really the best school that I could ever imagine for my child, for another's child. and connecting again with the values of a community, and then not letting that stray, is a formula for excellence if the values are important. And in our school, we had a change of strategy when I came. We did this through a community method, and we ended up saying our mission was 3 words only: inclusive, challenging, and engaged. And we rely on those words again and again because the bar for each of those words is incredibly high. And I always say that, for me to lead this mission, I have to embrace this at the highest of levels and be a model for that. And that changes how you run a school. To be an inclusive school means that you really are going to take on all those children with learning challenges, those with neurodiversity, those who've been ostracized or were marginalized in other communities, and make a place that is truly a place of belonging. And, and what we know from learning is that when you feel that you belong, when you feel that it's a place that feels good to be there, then your brain is able to do all those challenging and engaged pieces. So if you're missing this, if you're, a young person, and I think most of us can look back to experience when we didn't feel like we belonged and how awful that felt on a daily basis. So to lead towards my version of what is the best means that I have to take these pieces into account for all of us. And I have a funny community because it's so international. I would say I have families from Saudi Arabia to Sweden, and in that those two S's of Saudi and Swede is a whole world of belief systems and values and thoughts about education. But what we do is create a community that is special to us, where they all feel that they belong and have a place, and that we can be a cheerleader for their own identity and their own experience, and feel that they can bring that to the table, and that they're not an outsider in that little world of our school.
Yeah, absolutely. Belonging is such an amazing. Uh, it really is one of the keys, isn't it, for any community, any leader? If you can help people, I think one of my favorite ways it's articulated, Patrick Lencioni talks about it in his book about employee engagement, and he describes it as the opposite, as he often does, either talking about dysfunctions or disengagement. And he talks about anonymity. If someone ever feels
Mm,
anonymous, which is the opposite of belonging, right, where no one knows me here,
yes.
that's when you lose engagement. And I think people just want to be known. And it's funny how often in my coaching sessions with leaders, where you think, and sometimes we do chat about strategies and or high level vision and things, but one of the things that comes up the most, honestly, is just an encouragement for people to get back to connection. And it's amazing what connection does. Like if there's someone in your team, often, not always, but often just trying to work on the connection you have with that person, which can just be spending time with them, or and telling that to leaders in management roles, or if there's someone where you're really finding it challenging to engage with them, then ask, how can I make them feel they belong? How can I connect more with them? It's certainly not the answer all the time, but it's amazing how often doing that is part of the answer, I think, or part of a good approach to trying to lead a person or a team better.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's a step that sometimes we gloss over with, we'll have some kind of welcoming lunch or something. And, it's, you have these little tiny moments, but maybe not going deep enough. And it circles back to my own story, as I told, that I would be the person when I was in high school that you would forget my name. I was this anonymous character in high school, and the heart of my teaching has always been to not allow for any of my students to be that anonymous, to be known. And we talk about this a lot at the school, that our job first is to get to know our students and each other very, very, very well. Um, and there's no belonging if no one knows you, and you just feel that you're kind of like, a ghost in a building off doing your thing. And I know how hard it must be for those business and other leaders who are online, who have, the office has some detractions, but I can't imagine, onboarding a new person completely online in the past few years, how difficult that must have felt, and how oftentimes new workers to a company felt distanced from any sort of community. And so, how thinking that this is the priority for an individual um, is, and you have to take the time to do that, and overcome obstacles depending on your organization. But there's no meaning in work unless you feel that someone knows you, or you feel that you have a sense of belonging in that organization, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Uh, Kathleen, I want to ask about more recent years. We heard about that the sort of start and how you felt like you were played a little bit, which I love the way you expressed that as well, because that's something that is, for me anyway, it really has been a process of, I feel like I've built uh, built up an awareness and a process, and then knowing when to trust your gut, when to bring in an expert. That when I think back to myself starting, I really didn't have that in a balance, and I had to learn how to do that. And along the way for me definitely was going, why on earth did I take that advice, or how did I not see that person was coming in with a complete agenda, and I just thought, hey, someone to help, this is amazing. So I love that you shared that, because that really resonates with me. What about more recent years, as you've grown as a leader, and also taken, like you said, some incredible achievements, even at in Helsinki, where you are at the moment, in the past 4 years. But in more recent years in your career, can you think of any aha moments, any moments where you learnt a different lesson from, once again, either a big win where you went, oh, that is so true, or another thing where you went, okay, that was another favorite failure where I learned from so much from that? Any aha moments that pop into your mind?
I think maybe possibly when I work with parents, and parents are also clients in an organization like ours. So maybe there's some kind of for those who are listening, who work in a business, we're dealing with kind of the unhappy client issues in a school setting. When a parent is upset, there's deep seated kind of emotional reactions that are maybe different than if you were upset about your meal at the restaurant. So it took me a long time, and this is still a developing process, as to how I take the energy of a very, very upset adult who is maybe highly concerned about their child, and how do I handle a meeting of that is connected to an adult's past, so their own school experience, their own projections of fears about their child, and all conflated through the lens that they might have not experienced the issue, but through the lens of their child telling the experience of what might have happened on a school day. So a parent relying on the the um, the thoughts and perspectives of a 6-year-old as to whether or not you're performing as a school well enough. So what often happens is I'm the person who kind of like the per- the parent or the client maybe has gone up through the chain and is unhappy where suddenly they're at my door. And so I have to take this very distraught, sometimes angry energy, and figure out how am I going to get us to a place of understanding, um, or solutions. And um, I took some courses in something called cognitive coaching, which is used in the educational field. And what I learned, and this was a really, big learning. And although it seems so maybe understandable now for those who might be coaches, but when the parents come into my room, I am focused completely on setting a scene that is going to reduce stress of a highly stressed individual. And if you were to come into my office, where I work, I've made my office that looks completely like somebody's living room. There's nothing in my office, not a single item that looks like you would find in a business office. I have a beautiful blue couch that has a velvet finish to it. I have nice lighting. I have armchairs. Um, and what I do is, I bring that person who's very, very upset and I sit them down as if we're going to have a conversation like we're having right now. And I am fully present and engaged with that person. And I need to remove my ego from that moment. I need to be the deepest listener I can be, and not be the person who's trying to go tit for tat as to why this person is upset, and try to really hear the subtext of their story to find out what they're really afraid of. And it might have absolutely nothing to do with might have happened on that playground the day before, but trying to find what this client's true worries are about. And I've had some meetings that I think people would see if they were to record, would think that are just completely insane. I've had family members tell me, um, that and from various religious traditions about God told them this was what should happen. Next, I've had those who completely um, turn facts completely upside on their head that have nothing to do with reality. But I've got to like let that go as it's happening in the moment and just let them spew. Just let them get everything out. And meanwhile, I'm mimicking their body language and I'm totally focused. So if their legs are crossed, my legs are crossed. And if, their hands are on their knees, I have my hands on my knees. And I have nothing in between us. So I don't want to have any kind of tables or other things or a desk. And I'm with them at that moment. And I want to let them all get that all out and then be an active listener and repeat what I think they think the problem is. But at the same time, I am actively engaged trying to figure out what their fear is. And if I can find that and I can speak to that, I can tell you like the tension and the stress of that room is like it's like a balloon where it releases all the air and the person has felt they've gotten everything out and I have heard. And then we can think about next steps. And maybe it don't happen at that moment. But, you know, much of my job is dealing with those people at this level of stress. I am the final person you come to, teachers, students, parents, oftentimes, who are highly, highly agitated. And this has been my greatest learning, that my job is just to be this person who's with them at that moment, fully engaged, fully present, not trying to correct what I think are false pieces of false information at that moment, or that they have distorted something. Just being fully with them. And I can tell you, I've had some of the most difficult parents later become really good friends of mine. because they finally felt that someone fully listened, that was everything. And that took me.
Wow.
This is my 31st year as a leader, and it's taken me 28, 29 years to really understand what that really looks like and how to do it.
That's so good. I think it is like a secret sauce when you learn. And learning is one part when you realize it, but learning how to do it and actually becoming when you realize the power in exactly what you expressed there, where you can truly listen and go beyond truly listening and understanding for yourself, and actually get to the point where the other person, the penny drops for them, and they look across and go, wow, Kathleen really gets it. Like, you need, if the other person in the room with you can get to the point where they go, wow, Kathleen really hears me, that is that is a better start to any relationship, any setting, than nearly anything else you can do. Definitely than most things you can say. And the way I've learned that, I always say this to people about coaching, is when I first got into coaching, I think I assumed I would get to tell people, you know, great advice, Jonno's wonderful wisdom, and that would be incredible for people. Like, I probably never said that to anyone, hopefully,
Yes.
but that was somewhere in my brain, that I can. Oh wow, I'm going to help people so much. And my biggest reflection after coaching, a lot of leaders and working really hard on getting better at coaching and asking at the end of every session, what did you find most helpful, is that 95% of the time, what people find most helpful is having the space and the time and the questions asked back to them, and everything you described around mirroring as well, where people say, I think it was just being able to talk it out and feel heard. And
Yes.
I just, yeah, so I love that revelation, and it's just so powerful. I'm trying to explain it. I don't feel like I'm doing it justice. I think you did a
Yeah.
great job explaining it there. It's like, it's such a secret sauce to be able to lead and relate to people in your life better if you can truly engage with and learn to do what you just described.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's powerful in all relationships. I have a son who who really struggles with school. He has some challenges based on a really rare neurological issue, and he's a super Star Wars fan. And I would not say that before him I was a super Star Wars fan, but he needs to tell me things. And for me to relate to my 16-year-old son, I need to be a deep and active listener of everything he needs to tell me about Star Wars and an episode, and or how it was filmed, or character development. And I need, being fully present with another person and allowing them to truly express their passion and joys and be with them. So being on the, sometimes a coach is just kind of being on the side, cheerleading someone's passion. And how good that feels to have somebody who truly engages with, you know, your thoughts, is a gift. It's a gift for me to hear his thoughts, and it's a gift for him that, he has a mother who wants to listen. And I
Mm.
think that's the key for all relationships. Can you be a cheerleader for someone's passions and thoughts, and put yourself aside just for a few minutes, and how that's a precious gift for people.
Yeah, it's so good. I remember, it reminds me of, in the simplicity of what you've just described. I have a friend who is amazing. She's a teacher in early intervention here in Australia, and really gifted. Like, just really knows in terms of early intervention, with kids who are, say, 2 to 5 or 6 years old, who there's some acknowledgement of having different needs, and so there's this early intervention where she is often with these parents who are really trying to work out what to do, and I've learnt a lot from her. But one thing that sticks with me, she was just saying, I remember her saying something along the lines of, just when you're, in terms of understanding kids, is to, it's a bit like what you said about mirroring, but to get down to their level and play with them and do what, like to actually play with them and not try to take the game in a certain direction. If you're with a child who's doing
Yes.
something, you naturally would go and you'd start playing this game, but actually to sort of really look at what they're doing and try to work out how you can join in with what they're doing, even if you don't quite understand what they're doing. Actually getting down physically to their level and then actually joining in the game that they're playing,
Yes.
even if they're making sort of funny noises and they're doing something, to make those same noises back at them, like that idea of mirroring. And it's so funny that just popped into my head as you were sharing that story as well, because I think it's the hardest thing I've found about that. Like when I've tried to do that with any kids around me, like my wife and I have a 4-week-old, so there's not too many games that he can play yet, apart from just starting to recognize us. That's the big game at the moment. But with any kids that we're around, is putting aside. It's funny how even that's challenging, like to put aside whatever game or book and actually go, what are they wanting to do? And how do I just join in with, like, into their world for a moment?
Yes.
And it's so simple, but it reminds me of this conversation. And it's a similar, like the simplicity of actually putting aside myself and my interests and trying to go, what is this like? If I can really enter into your world and understand what you love about this topic or that, it's such a meaningful thing to do, and it's such a simple
Yes.
so many expensive things you can do as a leader to get better at leadership and reward people, but that's something that's free to do and just takes time and intentionality.
I think just what you were saying, I just felt like it just became a very beautiful metaphor of what coaching is really about. Willing to engage and play
Mm,
in someone else's world, and not really direct it. Like you said, not coaching is not about giving advice. It's kind of like entering into someone else's space, and having them then maybe lead a path out for them to self-discover
yes.
what might be their next steps. And it is a feeling of play at times, just to try to figure out what they're experiencing and what they're seeing, and be willing to enter into that space. This is, a very difficult technique, I think, to learn as a coach.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think this metaphor of, doing that with a 3 or 4-year-old is hard, because you're like, I have no idea what they're thinking about at the moment, and they're off on some kind of absurdist kind of story, and you're like, what is going on here? But like, just to be with them, like, okay, I'm gonna go along as if it was some kind of improv session, and be willing to play in that improv.
Yeah, that's I love that. It's such a great, it is a really fun comparison, because I think it's the challenge when you're the person listening, whether it's as a coach or a leader. It is such a challenge. The challenge is very similar to whether it's with that 3-year-old or whether it's with that person you're sitting across, to hold back your own thoughts and where you want to take the conversation. It's a similar, whether it's, oh, why don't we play this? I don't really get what they're doing. Or you're sitting across from someone going, oh, they should so read this book. And to actually push that aside
Right.
and go, what? Yeah, self-discover. I love what you said there about self-discovery. So much of leadership revelation and growth, when I chat to leaders, was self-discovery. Very rarely I had an aha moment when someone said such and such to me. That does happen, but a lot of it is in the
Yes.
self-discovery. And if you can help facilitate that, that's great leadership.
Yes. And so
Well,
powerful, just so
oh,
powerful, because they come away that they feel like, oh, I figured it out. Thank you for helping me figure it out.
yes. Well, I feel like I would love to invite you back for part 2, Kathleen, because this has been such a
Yes.
joy to chat with you. And we joked before recording about catching up over a real coffee at some point. We'll have to do that too, because there's
Yes.
been such a joy, and I just love your approach to leadership. just to wrap up, let me
Oh,
ask
thank
you a
you.
couple of Leadership Express questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
So the first one is, what's a book that you've gifted to other people or recommended a lot to other people?
It was funny when you asked that. I was thinking about it, and I think the book I've gifted often enough, and this is a good one for you since you have an infant, is a classic book called Good Night Moon by Margaret Wise Brown, which
Yeah.
is a very, very simple story for very young children. But that book is so poetic and so um, has such good advice about how to live our lives, how to end our days, and in this time of well-being crises around the world, reading that book to yourself in the evening, just for yourself, maybe not for your child, I think is I think is just a very wise story about what's important um, and how to set your priorities in your life. So, Good Night Moon. It's a quick read, um, but I think
So
a
good.
really powerful read.
It's it's funny. I love asking for these recommendations as part of Leadership Express. I get the most interesting recommendations, but I am also building a catalog of amazing children's books that people have recommended. I've had "Oh, the Places You'll Go" by Dr. Seuss recommended by someone.
Yeah.
The boy. I don't know if you've come across "The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse," which is
Yes.
a yeah, another beautiful book. So I've got both of those. So Good Night Moon, I'll put that on the list. And our little boy Roman, I'm sure, is going to get to enjoy these books that I wouldn't have come across if I didn't do this podcast. So that's a wonderful recommendation. Thank you. What
Yeah.
about now? I said before. We just said before that not often is it where someone says something and you go, that was my aha moment, but sometimes it is. Are there any great pieces of advice that you've received where someone mentioned something, told you something, and it just stuck with you as great advice in life or leadership?
There's a woman in the edu-sphere of Twitter and out there. Her name is Trisha Friedman, and she runs a podcast herself called Be a Better Ally. And she's interviewed me a number of times, and it's about LGBTQ allyship. And the, I don't know if she gave me a piece of advice, but she made me recognize that um, my voice in education about kind of this inclusive community was so incredibly needed, and that people were looking to me already with some of those ideas. And I didn't realize the power of my voice until I had her really point this out to me, that I was seen by some as kind of as a lighthouse, she said once to me, to others. And I took on that idea very seriously, because there's always a part of me that is that anonymous high schooler who's just like, oh, I don't want this kind of attention. I don't want to be the center of something. Sometimes I'm a bit of an introvert, but when she said that people were looking to me as a lighthouse, I realized in the last 2 3 years that I need to be that for others, and um, understanding that we all have that power to do that. And when we have it, it's again, it's a precious gift to not cast aside. And that there are people out there who see me as a woman, as a gay leader, as someone who's just kind of found a strange path into leadership, that in itself is inspiration, which I think that's, and sometimes I think that just seems ridiculous. I'm just doing my job, but understanding that people need that. People need to see, hey, someone else did that. Someone listening to your podcast, hearing about, just the story about my mother not finishing high school.
Yeah.
That might be enough. That might be that I was able to find a path, and that there's hope. And I've realized through Trisha Friedman that I was a source of hope that I didn't realize I was holding for others.
Wow. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I Yeah, that's beautiful advice, and I think I think leaders who are listening as well, just realizing that the how did someone put it? Someone said a quote about this on the podcast, and I can't remember what it was. It was so good, if only I could remember it. But it was something along the lines of as a leader, you'll say things in passing. You'll say things that you'll never remember, that people will never forget, and realizing that as a leader,
Yes.
there is an opportunity, and it can go both ways. And what a wonderful advice to realize, actually, just by doing what you're doing and being who you are a lighthouse, and people are looking to you. That's beautiful, Kathleen.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock, and I know it's early where you are, but this has been so much fun. We've just crossed the hour mark, and I did say half an hour, so
Yes.
I'd better take us to the finish line. Last question:
Okay.
if you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say to them?
I think the biggest piece of advice that I got was to run to the problems. And it's very easy to feel like, oh, hoping things will go away, or hoping things that might just disappear. But if you can recognize what are the biggest problems in your organization, yeah, run with all of your energy towards them, and try to figure out what might be solutions or changes or things you need to do. um, Putting things under the rug, or like, I'll have to deal with this later, is never going to serve you. um,
Hmm.
and for a person, newly into leadership, you're like, oh, it's the last thing I want to deal with. I can't believe I have to deal with this, and there's kind of this, always this stress around, like, how dare that this happens to me. But this is the test, over and over each day. Where are the problems? What must you run to? How can you give guidance? How can you make things better? And I often say that leadership is taking a step forward to make things better for others, and recognizing the problem
Hmm.
is the most important part of all.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice. Well, for those who have really enjoyed hearing some of your story, and also some of your wisdom on leadership, and they'd love to follow you online, where can people find you on
Yes.
LinkedIn or Twitter or anywhere else online, Kathleen?
Yeah. So you can find me online on Twitter at K Naglee, as one word, Knaglee, and I have a website as well, KathleenNaglee.com. And yeah, I love talking to people about where they're at. So I'm looking forward to hearing from some of your listeners about interesting things that they heard, and maybe
Mm,
making new friends.
absolutely. That's wonderful. People can find you there. Well, I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. This has been just a wonderful episode with Kathleen. I feel like it's brought wonderful ideas and stories about leadership, and I always know I've really loved an episode when I'm walking away, and sort of the brain is percolating on all the different things we talked about, because it's just been so much fun. Don't forget, I also have the Jonno White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast, where you can go to invest in your leadership as well. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to you, Kathleen, for getting up so early on the other side of the world to me, and just, yeah, being not only so wise, and I just love your approach to leadership, and I think you are going to encourage a lot of people, even just in what you shared today, but also just being so much fun to spend time with. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No, it's been a real joy, Jono, and I want to thank you for all the things you're doing for others, for this podcast as well. I know it's a source of inspiration and guidance for people around the world. So thank you for the service you're giving to others as well.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series, We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 questions on leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And you know, my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jonno White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.